The Nevada sun blazed mercilessly across the tarmac of Riverside Air Force Base as Sarah Mitchell knelt beside the open electronics bay of an F-35A Lightning II, her weathered hands moving with practiced precision through circuits that most technicians feared to touch. The sweat dripping from her forehead mixed with hydraulic fluid stains on her uniform, creating abstract patterns that told the story of another 14-hour shift in the desert heat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. To the pilots walking past, she was invisible. Just another grease monkey keeping their million-dollar toys operational. They saw the regulation ponytail, the safety glasses, the faded blue coveralls marked with countless repairs and coffee stains. They saw exactly what she wanted them to see: nothing. What they didn't see was the way her fingers traced the electronic warfare systems with intimate familiarity, or how her eyes automatically tracked every aircraft movement across the airfield. With the unconscious awareness of someone who understood flight patterns like a native language. They couldn't know that 5 years ago, Sarah Mitchell had been Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, the youngest pilot ever to graduate first in her class from Top Gun, holder of 3 Navy Cross medals, and leader of the most successful carrier strike missions in recent naval history. But that was before the South China Sea incident, before the betrayal that cost 6 lives and ended her career in a courtroom filled with lies and manufactured evidence, before she traded her wings for a wrench and her rank for anonymity. The morning alarm at 0445 had become Sarah's daily resurrection ritual. 5 years of the same routine: instant coffee that tasted like motor oil, a protein bar that could double as aircraft padding, and the lonely drive through Henderson's sleeping streets to Riverside Air Force Base. The guard at the main gate, Corporal Johnson, had stopped checking her identification months ago. She was part of the furniture now, as permanent and unremarkable as the concrete barriers and chain-link fencing. Her apartment was a study in deliberate emptiness. No photographs adorned the walls, no mementos cluttered the surfaces. The only personal items were 3 books hidden beneath her mattress, an advanced electronic warfare manual, a tactical flying handbook, and a worn copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War with notes scribbled in the margins. These were the only remnants of the woman she used to be, carefully preserved like artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. Sarah had chosen electronic specialization deliberately when she assumed her new identity. The work required intelligence and precision, but it kept her grounded literally and figuratively. While pilots soared through the Nevada skies above, she remained tethered to Earth by voltage meters and circuit diagrams. It was both penance and protection, close enough to aviation to feel the familiar rhythm of military life, but far enough from the cockpit to avoid suspicion. Master Sergeant Tony Rodriguez had been the first person at Riverside to treat her as more than a serial number. A 20-year veteran with kind eyes and calloused hands, he'd recognized something in her approach to the work that set her apart from typical technicians. Where others followed checklists mechanically, Sarah understood systems integration intuitively. She could diagnose problems that stumped engineers and suggest modifications that improved performance beyond specifications. Rodriguez never asked about her background, respecting the unspoken rule that everyone in the military carried stories they preferred to keep buried. But he'd watched her work long enough to know that her knowledge went deeper than any technical school could provide. The way she spoke about aircraft systems revealed understanding that could only come from first-hand experience in the cockpit. Their morning briefings had evolved into something approaching friendship, conducted over terrible coffee in the maintenance hangar while the day shift assembled their tools and reviewed work orders. Rodriguez would discuss the day's priorities while Sarah listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that details mattered. Missed connections meant failed missions. Failed missions meant pilots didn't come home. The F-35A Lightning II had become Sarah's specialty within the electronics division. The aircraft's sophisticated systems required constant calibration and maintenance, and few technicians possessed the knowledge necessary to work on its electronic warfare capabilities. Sarah had volunteered for the assignment immediately, drawn to the cutting-edge technology like a moth to flame. The Lightning II represented everything she loved about modern aviation: speed, precision, and technological supremacy. Working on the F-35 also provided access to flight schedules and pilot assignments. Sarah knew which pilots were scheduled for training runs, what exercises were planned, and how the aircraft performed under various conditions. This knowledge was supposed to help her anticipate maintenance needs, but it also fed a hunger she couldn't quite suppress: the need to remain connected, however tangentially, to the world of combat aviation. Lieutenant Kate Wilson was the only pilot who consistently acknowledged Sarah's existence beyond the professional minimum. A sharp-eyed fighter pilot with an engineering background, Wilson had noticed inconsistencies in Sarah's official biography. During casual conversations, technical knowledge that seemed too advanced for her stated experience, references to aircraft systems that weren't covered in standard training programs, small details that suggested a deeper background in aviation than her personnel file indicated. Wilson's curiosity was becoming problematic. During their most recent interaction, she'd asked pointed questions about Sarah's previous postings and training history. Sarah had deflected with practiced ease, but she could see the wheels turning behind Wilson's intelligent eyes. Military pilots were trained observers, and Wilson was clearly observing more than Sarah was comfortable revealing. The maintenance hangar buzzed with constant activity as dozens of technicians serviced the base's fleet of F-35s and F-16s. Sarah had carved out a small workspace in the corner where she could focus on electronics diagnostics without constant interruption. Her tools were arranged with military precision, each item in its designated place, ready for immediate use. The organization reflected habits ingrained during years of combat readiness, when seconds could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her colleagues knew her as someone who preferred working alone. She arrived early, stayed late, and rarely participated in the social interactions that bound military units together. This isolation was deliberate, but costly. Loneliness had become her constant companion, as much a part of her daily routine as the maintenance schedules and safety briefings. Sarah's cover story was simple and believable: a former Air Force communications specialist who'd retrained in electronics after a medical discharge. The fabricated medical history explained any gaps in her knowledge about standard enlisted experiences while providing justification for her technical expertise. She'd spent months perfecting the details, creating a believable narrative that would satisfy casual inquiry without inviting deeper investigation. The transformation from Lieutenant Commander Chun to Technician Mitchell had required more than just paperwork changes. She'd altered her appearance, softer military bearing, and learned to speak like someone who'd never commanded anything more complex than a work shift. The confident pilot who'd once briefed admirals had been replaced by a quiet technician who avoided eye contact and deferred to authority without question. Every morning brought the same internal struggle between the person she'd been and the person she needed to be. The urge to correct tactical errors in flight planning, to suggest improvements to maintenance procedures, to demonstrate knowledge that could save lives, all of these impulses had to be constantly suppressed. Speaking up would mean exposure, and exposure would mean losing the only life she had left. The work itself provided some satisfaction. Electronic systems on modern aircraft were marvels of engineering that challenged even experienced technicians. Sarah found genuine pleasure in solving complex problems and ensuring that pilots had reliable equipment for their missions. It wasn't the same as flying, but it was meaningful work that served a larger purpose. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had begun assigning her increasingly complex projects, recognizing her unusual aptitude for electronic warfare systems. The latest assignment involved calibrating radar, warning receivers on a squadron of F-35s scheduled for an upcoming training exercise, called Operation Thunderstrike. The work required security clearance that took weeks to process, suggesting that Rodriguez trusted her more than most technicians. Operation Thunderstrike was designed to test pilot skills against simulated enemy aircraft in realistic combat scenarios. The exercise would bring together pilots from multiple bases to compete in air-to-air combat simulations over the Nevada desert. For Sarah, it represented both opportunity and danger, a chance to work closely with advanced aircraft systems, but also increased visibility that might attract unwanted attention. The briefing materials for Thunderstrike revealed the exercise's scope and complexity. 12 F-35A Lightning IIs would face off against 8 F-16C fighting Falcons in formation combat scenarios designed to simulate real-world engagements. The F-16s would be flown by experienced aggressor pilots, trained to replicate enemy tactics and capabilities. Success would require not just individual skill, but coordinated teamwork and tactical awareness. Sarah studied the exercise parameters with professional interest, noting potential weaknesses in the planned approaches and identifying opportunities for tactical improvement. Old habits died hard, and she found herself mentally flying the missions, anticipating threats and developing countermeasures. It was dangerous thinking for someone trying to maintain a low profile, but she couldn't help herself. The pilot assignments for Thunderstrike read like a who's who of Air Force combat aviation. Squadron leaders from bases across the country would participate, including several pilots with combat experience in recent conflicts. Their personnel files made for impressive reading. Graduates of elite training programs, holders of distinguished flying crosses, veterans of missions that remained classified. Among the participant files, one name stood out: Captain Brad Thompson from Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. His record showed exceptional marks in flight training, multiple commendations for aerial combat exercises, and a family history of military service dating back 3 generations. On paper, he looked like the ideal Air Force officer. But something about his photograph triggered an uncomfortable recognition in Sarah's memory. She'd encountered Thompson's type before: pilots who confused privilege with skill and mistook political connections for competence. His file showed a career trajectory that suggested family influence as much as personal achievement. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rapid promotions, choice assignments, and glowing evaluations that seemed disproportionate to his actual experience. The combination was familiar and troubling. Thompson's social media presence, which Sarah researched during her lunch break, revealed exactly what she'd expected to find. Photos of exclusive military events, casual mentions of family connections to senior officers, and the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences for poor decisions. His posts about enlisted personnel were particularly revealing, showing barely concealed contempt disguised as humor. The upcoming exercise would place Thompson in command of one of the F-16 aggressor squadrons, giving him authority over both aircraft and personnel. Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach as she imagined how someone with his background would treat support personnel during high-stress training scenarios. Men like Thompson viewed technicians as expendable resources rather than essential team members. Her workspace in the maintenance hangar provided an excellent vantage point for observing flight operations. From her corner desk, Sarah could watch aircraft takeoffs and landings while appearing to focus on diagnostic equipment. The constant air traffic provided a soundtrack to her work: the roar of afterburners, the whistle of air over wings, the controlled chaos of a busy military airfield. The sounds triggered memories she'd tried to bury. The sensation of pulling G's in a steep climb, the adrenaline rush of successful weapons delivery, the satisfaction of bringing her squadron home safely from dangerous missions. 5 years hadn't dulled these memories. They remained as vivid as yesterday's lunch. Sometimes, late at night in her empty apartment, Sarah would close her eyes and imagine herself back in the cockpit of an F-A-18 Super Hornet, master of her own destiny instead of invisible to everyone around her. The transition from naval aviation to Air Force maintenance had required learning new protocols and procedures. Different aircraft, different systems, different culture. The Navy emphasized ship-based operations and carrier landings that demanded split-second precision. The Air Force focused on land-based missions with longer-range capabilities and different tactical considerations. Sarah had absorbed these differences quickly, her background providing context that accelerated the learning process. Her security clearance investigation had been the most dangerous part of assuming her new identity. Military investigators were thorough, and any inconsistency in her background story could have exposed the carefully constructed fiction of Sarah Mitchell's existence. She'd spent sleepless weeks waiting for the clearance to be approved, knowing that discovery would mean not just the loss of her job, but potential criminal charges for identity fraud. The clearance had come through without incident, a testament to the quality of the documentation and the thoroughness of her preparation. Now she could access classified technical manuals and work on sensitive electronic systems without restriction. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had higher clearance as a technician than many officers, including some of the pilots whose aircraft she maintained. Working with classified systems also meant regular security briefings and periodic polygraph examinations. Sarah had learned to compartmentalize her thoughts during these sessions, focusing on her current role while suppressing memories of her previous life. The polygraph operators never detected deception because in her mind, Sarah Mitchell was real and Lieutenant Commander Cheen was history. The approaching Operation Thunderstrike exercise would test more than pilot skills. It would also challenge the maintenance crews responsible for keeping 12 F-35s and 8 F-16s operational during intensive flight operations. Sarah's expertise with electronic warfare systems made her essential to the effort, a recognition that brought both pride and anxiety. Visibility was dangerous for someone with secrets to protect. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had already indicated that Sarah would be assigned to the primary maintenance crew for the exercise, working directly with pilots and their aircraft during the competition. The assignment was an honor that reflected his confidence in her abilities, but it also meant increased exposure to officers who might ask uncomfortable questions about her background and training. The maintenance hangar had become Sarah's sanctuary over the past 5 years. Within its familiar walls, surrounded by the tools and equipment of her trade, she felt a sense of purpose that helped mask the deeper emptiness in her life. The work was challenging enough to occupy her mind while providing the structure and routine that military personnel craved. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd chosen after her world collapsed. As the sun reached its zenith over the Nevada desert, casting harsh shadows across the flight line, Sarah completed her morning diagnostics on the F-35s assigned to Thunderstrike. The aircraft were in perfect condition, their electronic systems calibrated to specifications that would give their pilots every possible advantage in the upcoming competition. She took professional pride in this work, knowing that her expertise contributed to mission success, even if no one would ever acknowledge her contribution. The afternoon would bring new challenges as arriving pilots began familiarizing themselves with Riverside's facilities and procedures. Sarah would remain in the background, invisible and essential, maintaining the aircraft while observing the personalities that would soon collide in the crucible of simulated combat. She had no way of knowing that among those personalities was someone whose arrogance would soon shatter her carefully constructed anonymity and force her to choose between safety and honor. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. In 3 days, Operation Thunderstrike would begin, bringing together the best pilots the Air Force had to offer for a competition that would test skills, tactics, and character. Sarah Mitchell, electronics technician and invisible woman, was about to discover that some secrets were too powerful to remain buried forever. The ghost of Lieutenant Commander Chun was stirring, and soon the world would remember why she'd once been considered one of the finest combat pilots of her generation. Captain Brad Thompson arrived at Riverside Air Force Base like a conquering hero returning from distant campaigns. His F-16C Fighting Falcon touched down with textbook precision, but Thompson made sure everyone noticed by executing an unnecessary victory roll before landing, a flashy maneuver that violated base regulations and demonstrated exactly the kind of ego that made seasoned pilots roll their eyes. The ground crew scattered as he taxied to his assigned parking spot, his aircraft's engines screaming at maximum power long after a normal pilot would have throttled back. Sarah watched from her position near the maintenance hangar as Thompson climbed out of his cockpit, his movements deliberate and theatrical. Even from a distance, she could see him scanning the assembled ground personnel with the calculating gaze of someone assessing his audience. His flight suit was immaculate, pressed and fitted as if he were attending a parade rather than arriving for a combat exercise. The contrast with the rumpled, work-stained uniforms of the maintenance crews couldn't have been more obvious or more intentional. Thompson's support team materialized around him with practiced efficiency, an aide carrying his personal gear, a photographer documenting his arrival, and several junior officers whose primary job seemed to be laughing at his jokes and nodding at his observations. The entourage moved across the tarmac like a small military parade, drawing attention and creating exactly the kind of spectacle that Thompson clearly craved. Master Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at Sarah's shoulder, his expression darkening as he observed the arriving pilot's behavior. Rodriguez had served long enough to recognize the type officers who confused rank with competence and treated every interaction as an opportunity for self-promotion. His weathered face showed the kind of weary disgust that came from watching too many talented enlisted personnel dismissed or ignored by people with half their skill and twice their arrogance. The base operations center had been transformed into a hive of activity as participating pilots from 6 different installations reported for Operation Thunderstrike. Sarah's security clearance allowed her access to the facility, where she was installing upgraded electronic warfare modules in the mission planning computers. The work required her to remain invisible while pilots discussed tactics and strategies that would determine the exercise's outcome. Thompson dominated every conversation he joined, his voice carrying across the operations center with the practiced projection of someone accustomed to being heard. He regaled fellow pilots with stories of previous exercises, each tale carefully crafted to highlight his own tactical brilliance while subtly diminishing his competitors' achievements. The performance was polished and effective, establishing him as the alpha personality in a room full of accomplished aviators. Lieutenant Kate Wilson observed Thompson's behavior with barely concealed irritation. As one of only 2 female pilots participating in Thunderstrike, she'd encountered his type throughout her career: men who assumed their gender automatically granted them superior flying skills. Wilson had outperformed dozens of such pilots during her rise through the ranks, but Thompson's particular brand of casual sexism was more sophisticated than most, disguised as professional concern or helpful advice. Sarah finished her installation work and prepared to leave the operations center when Thompson's voice cut through the ambient noise with unmistakable condescension. He was addressing a young airman who'd brought him coffee, his tone suggesting he was speaking to a particularly slow child rather than a trained military professional. The interaction was brief but revealing, showcasing Thompson's fundamental belief that rank determined worth and that enlisted personnel existed solely to serve his convenience. The incident triggered memories Sarah had worked hard to suppress. She remembered similar officers from her time as Lieutenant Commander Chun, pilots who treated support personnel as invisible until they needed something, then demanded instant compliance with unreasonable requests. These were the same people who would blame maintenance crews for mechanical failures while taking full credit for successful missions. Thompson represented everything she'd learned to despise about military hierarchy and privilege. Sarah's afternoon assignment involved conducting pre-flight inspections on the F-35s that would participate in tomorrow's initial training flights. The work placed her in direct contact with arriving pilots as they familiarized themselves with their assigned aircraft. Most interactions were brief and professional, pilots acknowledging her expertise while focusing on their own preparations. Thompson, however, had different ideas about appropriate pilot-technician relationships. He approached Sarah's workstation with the swagger of someone expecting immediate attention and deference. His opening comment was delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a practiced expression of false friendliness that poorly concealed his actual contempt for enlisted personnel. The question he posed about her qualifications was phrased as professional interest, but his tone suggested he was testing her knowledge to confirm his assumptions about technician competence. Sarah responded with the carefully neutral professionalism she'd perfected during 5 years of invisibility. Her answers were accurate but not detailed, demonstrating sufficient knowledge to satisfy regulations while avoiding any display of expertise that might invite deeper scrutiny. She'd learned to walk this tightrope perfectly competent enough to do her job effectively, but not so impressive as to attract unwanted attention or suspicion about her background. Thompson's reaction was predictable and disappointing. Satisfied that she was just another grease monkey with basic technical knowledge, he immediately shifted into teaching mode, explaining aircraft systems and procedures with the patronizing patience of someone addressing a small child. His lecture covered topics that Sarah understood better than most of the pilots on base, but she nodded politely and asked appropriate questions to maintain her cover. The demonstration continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Thompson growing increasingly animated as he warmed to his subject. He spoke about electronic warfare capabilities as if he were revealing classified secrets, unaware that Sarah had not only worked with far more advanced systems, but had also developed tactical applications that were still classified at the highest levels. Her forced ignorance seemed to energize him, confirming his beliefs about the intellectual gap between pilots and support personnel. Other pilots began gathering around Thompson's impromptu lecture, some drawn by genuine curiosity, but most attracted by the entertainment value of watching their colleague hold court. Sarah found herself at the center of a growing audience, her position becoming increasingly uncomfortable as more officers arrived to witness her supposed education. The crowd's mood was light, almost festive, as if they were attending a particularly amusing training demonstration. Wilson appeared at the edge of the group, her expression unreadable as she observed the interaction. Sarah caught her eye briefly and saw something unexpected there, not amusement or condescension, but what looked like sympathy mixed with growing anger. Wilson seemed to recognize that what others viewed as harmless entertainment was actually a subtle form of professional harassment, designed to reinforce hierarchies and maintain social distance between officers and enlisted personnel. Thompson's lecture evolved into a quiz, with questions designed to highlight Sarah's supposed limitations while showcasing his own superior knowledge. The questions were crafted to have obvious answers that any experienced technician would know, but Thompson presented them as if they were challenging concepts that might strain her intellectual capabilities. The underlying message was clear. Pilots possessed sophisticated understanding, while technicians merely followed instructions without comprehension. Sarah answered each question correctly, but simply, maintaining her cover while fighting the growing urge to demonstrate actual expertise. Part of her wanted to ask Thompson about advanced electronic countermeasure deployment or discuss the tactical implications of different radar warning receiver configurations. She could have posed questions that would expose the limitations of his knowledge while revealing the depth of her own understanding. But such displays would shatter her carefully constructed identity and invite investigations she couldn't survive. The crowd's reactions to Thompson's performance varied according to rank and personality. Junior officers laughed appreciatively at his jokes and nodded seriously during his technical explanations, recognizing the social dynamics at play and choosing to align themselves with obvious authority. More experienced pilots showed less enthusiasm, their expressions suggesting they'd witnessed similar performances before and found them increasingly tiresome rather than entertaining. Master Sergeant Rodriguez watched from a distance, his face displaying the kind of controlled anger that came from watching talented people diminished by those with less skill but more privilege. Sarah could see him weighing his options: intervene and risk confrontation with a visiting officer, or allow the humiliation to continue while documenting behavior that violated regulations about professional conduct. Neither choice was satisfactory, but Rodriguez's position as an NCO limited his authority to challenge Thompson directly. The quiz intensified as Thompson gained confidence from the crowd's attention and Sarah's apparent deference. His questions became more pointed and personal, probing her background and training history with the persistence of someone sensing potential weakness. Sarah deflected these inquiries with practiced skill, providing answers that satisfied curiosity, without revealing information that could compromise her cover story. Thompson's increasing boldness reflected his growing certainty that he was dealing with exactly what he'd expected: a technically competent, but intellectually limited technician who could perform routine tasks but lacked the sophisticated understanding required for real aviation expertise. This assumption was both his greatest strength and his fatal weakness, providing the foundation for escalating behavior while blinding him to signals that should have warned him about his target's true capabilities. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the flight line as Thompson's impromptu seminar continued. Sarah remained trapped at the center of attention, unable to leave without appearing rude or insubordinate, forced to endure increasingly condescending instruction about systems she understood better than her instructor. The irony was bitter but familiar. She'd spent 5 years learning to accept such treatment as the price of maintaining her freedom. Wilson's patience finally reached its breaking point when Thompson made a particularly dismissive comment about the intellectual requirements for technical work. She stepped forward with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command presence, her voice cutting through Thompson's monologue with quiet authority. Her intervention was subtle but effective, redirecting attention while providing Sarah with an opportunity to extract herself from the increasingly uncomfortable situation. Thompson's reaction to Wilson's interruption revealed volumes about his character and motivations. Rather than graciously accepting the redirect, he doubled down on his performance, attempting to draw Wilson into the demonstration as either participant or audience. His comments about female understanding of technical systems were carefully worded to avoid obvious offense while conveying unmistakable condescension. Wilson's response was equally measured, acknowledging his remarks while subtly challenging their underlying assumptions. The dynamics shifted as more pilots recognized the subtext of Thompson's behavior and Wilson's response. What had begun as lighthearted entertainment was evolving into something more serious, a public testing of personalities and values that would influence relationships throughout the exercise. Sarah found herself at the center of a developing conflict between competing visions of military professionalism and appropriate conduct. Thompson seemed oblivious to the changing mood, his confidence in his own performance blinding him to signs of growing discomfort among his audience. He continued his lecture with increasing intensity, apparently believing that persistence would eventually win over any skeptics while cementing his position as the dominant personality in the group. His tactical error was assuming that social dynamics in military settings followed the same rules as civilian environments, where loudest voice often prevailed. The gathering began to disperse as individual pilots remembered pressing obligations or simply grew tired of the entertainment. Thompson's audience dwindled gradually, his platform shrinking as people found reasons to be elsewhere. Sarah used the confusion to escape, gathering her tools and moving toward a different work area where she could complete her assignments without further interference. Wilson lingered after the others had departed, her conversation with Thompson taking on a more serious tone as the performance aspects faded away. Sarah couldn't hear their exchange from her new position, but their body language suggested a professional disagreement about appropriate conduct and standards. Thompson's gestures became more animated, while Wilson maintained the controlled posture of someone delivering unwelcome feedback. The confrontation between Wilson and Thompson established patterns that would define their relationship throughout. Operation Thunderstrike. She represented professional competence and inclusive leadership while he embodied traditional hierarchy and privilege-based authority. Their conflict was personal, but also symbolic, reflecting broader tensions within military culture about merit versus connection and individual versus institutional values. Sarah completed her remaining work assignments with mechanical efficiency, her mind processing the afternoon's events and their potential implications. Thompson's behavior was troubling but predictable, fitting patterns she'd observed throughout her military career. What concerned her more was his obvious comfort with public humiliation and his assumption that such behavior was not only acceptable but entertaining to his peers. The maintenance hangar buzzed with conversation as word spread about Thompson's impromptu seminar and Wilson's intervention. Opinions varied according to rank and experience, but the overall consensus among enlisted personnel was clear. Thompson represented exactly the kind of officer they'd learned to avoid when possible and endure when necessary. His arrival had already changed the atmosphere on base, creating tension where none had existed before. Master Sergeant Rodriguez called Sarah aside as the evening shift prepared to take over maintenance responsibilities. His expression was carefully controlled, but she could see anger simmering beneath his professional demeanor. Rodriguez had served long enough to recognize dangerous personalities, and Thompson's behavior triggered every warning signal his experience had taught him to respect. Rodriguez's questions about the afternoon's events were carefully phrased to avoid seeming like gossip while gathering information he might need for future reference. Sarah's responses were equally measured, providing factual accounts without editorial commentary that could be construed as disrespectful toward a superior officer. Both understood the delicate balance required when dealing with problematic leadership while maintaining their own professional standards. The conversation revealed Rodriguez's growing concern about potential incidents during the exercise. Thompson's combination of arrogance and insensitivity created conditions ripe for serious conflict, especially when combined with the competitive pressure and ego dynamics that inevitably emerge during high-stakes training events. Rodriguez had seen similar situations explode into career-ending disasters for everyone involved. Sarah's evening routine provided welcome escape from the day's tensions. Her small apartment offered sanctuary from the constant performance required to maintain her cover identity. Within its walls, she could drop the submissive posture and differential speech patterns that characterized Sarah Mitchell, allowing glimpses of the confident officer who still existed beneath the carefully constructed facade. The technical manuals she studied each night served multiple purposes, maintaining her expertise, staying current with technological developments, and providing intellectual stimulation that her official duties couldn't satisfy. Tonight she focused on electronic warfare systems integration, reading about advances that reminded her how much the field had evolved since her active service days. The apartment's silence was broken only by the occasional roar of aircraft engines as night training flights continued overhead. Each sound triggered memories of her own flying days, when she'd been the one pushing through darkness toward distant targets rather than listening from the ground like an earthbound observer. The contrast between past and present was especially sharp during moments like these, when the life she'd lost seemed almost close enough to touch. Thompson's arrival had disrupted more than just the base's normal rhythm. His presence represented a threat to the careful equilibrium Sarah had established during 5 years of careful invisibility. Officers like Thompson thrived on confrontation and dominance, constantly testing boundaries and challenging anyone who might represent competition or resistance. Such personalities were drawn to conflict like moths to flame, unable to resist opportunities to establish superiority. Sleep came slowly that night as Sarah's mind processed scenarios and contingencies. Thompson's behavior suggested he would continue pushing boundaries until someone pushed back, but any confrontation involving enlisted personnel and commissioned officers carried enormous risks for the enlisted person involved. Military justice systems were designed to protect institutional authority, and challenging an officer required overwhelming evidence of misconduct that was difficult to obtain and dangerous to pursue. The first full day of Operation Thunderstrike would bring new challenges as pilots began actual flight training and competition events. Sarah's role would expand to include real-time maintenance support, placing her in close proximity to aircraft and personnel during high-stress operations. Thompson's personality suggested he would view such situations as opportunities to reinforce hierarchies and demonstrate authority over support personnel. Wilson's intervention had provided temporary protection, but it also escalated the underlying conflict by challenging Thompson's assumptions about appropriate conduct. His response to such challenges was predictable double down on questionable behavior while seeking opportunities to reassert dominance. The combination was potentially explosive, especially in an environment where egos and competitiveness were already elevated. Rodriguez's concerns reflected broader institutional problems that extended far beyond individual personalities. Thompson represented systemic issues about leadership development, accountability, and institutional values that allowed problematic officers to advance through political connections rather than demonstrated competence. His presence at Thunderstrike was symptomatic of deeper cultural problems that enabled abuse while protecting abusers. Sarah's unique position provided insights into these dynamics that most people missed. Her experience as both officer and enlisted personnel revealed how differently military institutions treated individuals based on rank and connection rather than contribution or character. The contrast was especially stark for someone who had commanded respect as Lieutenant Commander Chen, but now endured condescension as Technician Mitchell. The stage was set for escalating confrontation as personalities and institutional pressures combined in an environment designed to test limits and reveal character. Thompson's arrival had introduced volatile elements into what should have been routine training exercise, creating conditions where small incidents could cascade into major conflicts. Sarah found herself at the center of developing storm. Her carefully maintained anonymity increasingly threatened by forces beyond her control. Dawn broke over Riverside Air Force Base with the crisp clarity that only Nevada mornings could provide. But the pristine sky would soon be shattered by events no one could have anticipated. The third day of Operation Thunder Strike had been designated for the most challenging phase of the exercise leave formation combat scenarios, where pilots would test their skills against experienced aggressor squadrons in aerial engagements that pushed both man and machine to their operational limits. Sarah arrived at the flight line earlier than usual, drawn by an inexplicable sense of foreboding that had kept her awake through most of the night. The maintenance crew was already deep into pre-flight preparations, their movements sharp and focused as they readied 12 F-35A Lightning IIs for what promised to be the most demanding day of flying in the exercise. The aircraft sat like sleeping predators on the tarmac, their stealth profiles gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the maintenance areas. The morning briefing had been moved to accommodate last-minute changes in weather patterns and airspace restrictions, creating a compressed timeline that added pressure to an already tense situation. Captain Thompson held court in the pilot briefing room, his voice carrying across the space with the confident authority of someone who had never questioned his own tactical brilliance. His F-16C Fighting Falcon Squadron would serve as the primary opposition force, tasked with intercepting and engaging the F-35s in simulated combat scenarios that would test every aspect of pilot skill and aircraft capability. Thompson's tactical presentation revealed both his strengths and his fundamental weaknesses as a combat leader. His technical knowledge was solid, his understanding of aircraft systems adequate, and his grasp of basic fighter tactics competent, enough to satisfy most observers. However, his approach lacked the subtle nuances that separated good pilots from great ones: the intuitive understanding of three-dimensional combat dynamics, the ability to anticipate enemy responses, and the tactical flexibility required for success against unpredictable opponents. Lieutenant Wilson sat in the front row of the briefing room, her notebook filled with observations and tactical notes that demonstrated preparation far exceeding her peers. She had spent the previous evening studying Thompson's flying history, analyzing his documented strengths and identifying potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited during aerial combat. Wilson understood that Thunderstrike represented more than just training. It was an opportunity to demonstrate that competence mattered more than connections. That skill could triumph over privilege when the stakes were high enough. The first wave of F-35s lifted off at precisely 0800 hours, their departure coordinated with the precision that characterized all aspects of Operation Thunderstrike. Sarah watched from her position near the maintenance hangar as the aircraft climbed into formation, their sleek profiles disappearing into the morning haze as they headed toward the designated training area. The sight triggered familiar pangs of longing, memories of her own flying days when she had been the one leading formations into challenging missions rather than watching from the ground. Thompson's F-16 squadron followed 30 minutes later, their older aircraft lacking the technological sophistication of the Lightning II, but compensating with proven reliability and the experience of pilots who specialized in aggressor tactics. Thompson had positioned himself as flight leader, a role that would place him at the center of the developing aerial battle while providing maximum visibility for what he clearly expected to be a dominant performance against younger, less experienced opponents. The exercise scenario involved a complex series of engagements designed to test pilot decision-making under pressure. The F-35s would attempt to penetrate simulated enemy airspace while the F-16s provided defensive coverage, creating multiple opportunities for tactical innovation and aerial combat. Success would require not just individual skill, but coordinated teamwork and the ability to adapt tactics in response to changing circumstances. Sarah monitored the exercise through the maintenance communication network, her security clearance, providing access to real-time updates on aircraft status and pilot performance. The initial phases proceeded according to plan, with both sides maneuvering for tactical advantage while adhering to safety protocols that prevented actual weapons engagement. However, the competitive atmosphere was already generating tensions that threatened to exceed the bounds of normal training exercises. Thompson's voice dominated the radio frequencies, his commentary on tactical developments revealing both confidence and condescension toward his opponents. He treated the engagement like a teaching exercise, offering running commentary on F-35 pilot errors, while positioning his own aircraft for what he clearly believed would be decisive tactical victories. His approach demonstrated technical competence, but also revealed dangerous overconfidence that could lead to serious tactical mistakes. The first major incident occurred during the second engagement phase, when an F-35 pilot attempted an aggressive maneuver that placed his aircraft in a vulnerable position. Relative to Thompson's attacking F-16, Thompson exploited the opportunity with textbook precision, achieving a simulated missile lock that would have resulted in a kill under combat conditions. His celebration was audible across multiple radio channels, a victory dance that violated protocols about professional conduct during training exercises. Wilson's aircraft had been monitoring the engagement from a supporting position, her pilot's instincts recognizing the developing tactical situation before other participants understood what was happening. She observed Thompson's response to his simulated victory with growing irritation, noting how his celebration seemed designed more for audience effect than genuine satisfaction with tactical achievement. The performance aspect of his behavior was becoming more pronounced as the exercise continued. The morning's flying concluded with mixed results that reflected the competitive intensity of the participants rather than clear tactical superiority by either side. Thompson's squadron had achieved several simulated kills against the F-35s, but they had also suffered losses that demonstrated the newer aircraft's technological advantages when properly employed. The overall score was close enough to generate arguments about scoring methodology and engagement rules rather than clear acknowledgement of superior performance. The debriefing session that followed the morning flights was supposed to focus on tactical lessons learned and performance improvement opportunities. Instead, it became a platform for Thompson to hold court about his squadron's successes while offering unsolicited advice to F-35 pilots about their tactical shortcomings. His commentary was technically accurate, but delivered with the kind of patronizing tone that transformed constructive criticism into personal insult. Wilson's patience finally reached its breaking point when Thompson made a particularly condescending comment about female pilots lacking the aggressive instincts required for aerial combat success. Her response was immediate and pointed, challenging both his tactical assumptions and his underlying attitudes with the precision of someone who had faced such prejudices throughout her career. The exchange escalated quickly from professional disagreement to personal confrontation. The debriefing room fell silent as other pilots recognized they were witnessing something more significant than routine post-flight discussion. Thompson's reaction to Wilson's challenge revealed the true nature of his character. When confronted with competent opposition, his confidence transformed into defensive anger that stripped away the veneer of professional courtesy. His response included personal attacks disguised as tactical criticism and casual dismissal of Wilson's achievements based on gender stereotypes rather than performance evaluation. Colonel Parker, the base commander overseeing Thunderstrike, attempted to defuse the situation by calling for a lunch break and individual consultations with participating pilots. However, the damage had been done. The competitive atmosphere had been poisoned by personal animosity that would influence all subsequent interactions. Thompson had revealed himself as someone who viewed challenge as threat and responded to competent opposition with escalating aggression rather than professional respect. The afternoon flying schedule included the exercise's most demanding scenarios, multiple aircraft engagements in contested airspace, with complex tactical objectives that would test every aspect of pilot skill and aircraft capability. The missions were designed to simulate real-world combat conditions, where tactical errors could result in catastrophic consequences, making them ideal platforms for settling the morning's unresolved conflicts through demonstrated performance, rather than verbal confrontation. Sarah spent the lunch break conducting routine maintenance on the F-35s that would participate in the afternoon missions. The work provided welcome distraction from the growing tensions among the pilot community. But she couldn't escape the sense that events were building towards some kind of climactic confrontation. Thompson's behavior pattern suggested he would use the afternoon flights to reassert dominance while settling scores with anyone who had challenged his authority. The maintenance hangar buzzed with speculation about the morning's conflicts and their potential impact on afternoon flying. Senior NCOs like Rodriguez expressed concern about pilot attitudes affecting safety protocols, while younger technicians seemed energized by the drama of watching officers argue about tactical competence. Sarah remained focused on her work, but she couldn't ignore the growing conviction that Thompson's personality would eventually create a situation requiring intervention from someone with real authority. Wilson appeared at Sarah's workstation during the afternoon break, ostensibly to discuss technical specifications for her F-35's electronic warfare systems, but actually seeking an opportunity for private conversation away from the pilot briefing areas. Her questions about system capabilities were more sophisticated than typical pilot inquiries, suggesting knowledge that went beyond standard training curricula. Sarah answered carefully, providing accurate technical information while avoiding displays of expertise that might invite unwanted attention. The conversation revealed Wilson's growing suspicions about Sarah's background and qualifications. Her questions probed areas that wouldn't concern most pilots unless they had engineering training or extensive experience with advanced aircraft systems. Sarah deflected these inquiries with practiced skill, but she could see Wilson's analytical mind processing inconsistencies and drawing conclusions that came uncomfortably close to the truth about her real identity and experience. Wilson's final question was the most direct. Where had Sarah learned so much about electronic countermeasure integration and tactical applications? The inquiry was casual but pointed, delivered with the kind of focused attention that suggested Wilson had been thinking about this question for some time. Sarah's response was carefully neutral, attributing her knowledge to technical training and professional reading rather than operational experience. But Wilson's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. The afternoon flying began with heightened tensions that were immediately apparent to anyone monitoring radio communications. Thompson's voice carried an edge of aggression that went beyond normal competitive intensity, while other pilots seemed more cautious in their tactical approaches. The combination created an atmosphere where normal training protocols were being stretched by personalities and emotions rather than professional objectives. The first engagement unfolded according to planned scenarios, but the underlying dynamics were different from morning operations. Thompson flew with aggressive intensity that bordered on recklessness, pushing his F-16 to performance limits that exceeded safety margins for training exercises. His tactical approach emphasized dominance over prudence, seeking spectacular victories rather than methodical achievement of mission objectives. Wilson's response was equally aggressive but far more calculated, her tactical decisions reflecting careful analysis of Thompson's flying patterns and psychological makeup. She had identified his tendency toward overconfidence and was systematically exploiting weaknesses in his approach while maintaining strict adherence to safety protocols. Her flying demonstrated the difference between controlled aggression and dangerous showmanship. The radio exchanges between Thompson and Wilson during their aerial encounters revealed the personal nature of their conflict. Thompson's commentary included subtle insults disguised as tactical advice, while Wilson responded with precise technical corrections that highlighted his tactical errors without descending to personal attack. The contrast in their approaches was evident to anyone monitoring their communications. The crisis began during the third engagement phase, when mechanical problems forced an F-35 to make an emergency landing at a remote training strip rather than returning to Riverside. The pilot, Lieutenant Collins, was uninjured but stranded with an aircraft that required immediate maintenance attention to determine the extent of damage and feasibility of repair. The situation called for rapid response from maintenance personnel with specialized knowledge of 35 systems. Colonel Parker's solution was pragmatic, but problematic: load essential maintenance equipment and qualified technicians into an available aircraft for immediate transport to the emergency landing site. The mission would require someone capable of conducting field repairs under primitive conditions while maintaining strict safety standards. Sarah's expertise with F-35 electronic systems made her the obvious choice for the mission. But transportation options were severely limited. The only aircraft immediately available for the emergency response was Thompson's F-16C, configured as a two-seat trainer that could accommodate both pilot and passenger. Thompson volunteered for the mission with suspicious enthusiasm, apparently, viewing it as an opportunity to demonstrate his piloting skills while reinforcing his authority over support personnel. His offer to transport Sarah to the emergency site was accepted despite obvious concerns about his motivations. Sarah found herself trapped by circumstances beyond her control, refusing the mission would abandon a stranded pilot and potentially compromise aircraft recovery. But accepting meant placing herself in Thompson's power during a flight where anything could happen. The choice was between duty and safety, between professional responsibility and personal security. Her decision was inevitable given her character, but it placed her in exactly the kind of vulnerable situation she had spent 5 years avoiding. The pre-flight briefing for the emergency response mission was conducted with unusual speed due to time pressures, but Thompson made sure to emphasize the challenging nature of flying in the F-16's rear seat for someone unaccustomed to high-performance aircraft. His comments were ostensibly helpful, but actually designed to create anxiety, while establishing his role as expert pilot dealing with nervous passenger. Sarah endured his condescension while conducting her own assessment of the tactical situation. Thompson's F-16C was configured for training missions with full dual controls that would allow instruction or emergency takeover from either seat. Sarah noted these details with professional interest, her pilot's instincts automatically cataloging information that might prove useful under emergency conditions. Thompson interpreted her careful observation as nervous fascination with unfamiliar technology, missing entirely the systematic evaluation being conducted by someone with extensive high-performance aircraft experience. The takeoff proceeded normally, despite Thompson's unnecessary commentary about G-forces and aircraft performance, characteristics that Sarah supposedly wouldn't understand. His explanation of basic aerodynamic principles was delivered with patronizing patience, designed to reinforce the gap between pilot expertise and technician ignorance. Sarah listened with apparent attention while her mind focused on more important considerations: flight path analysis, weather conditions, and emergency procedures that might become relevant during an increasingly unpredictable mission. The flight toward the emergency landing site provided Thompson with a captive audience for demonstrations of his piloting skills and tactical knowledge. He flew with aggressive precision designed to impress his passenger while maintaining control over the aircraft and situation. His running commentary covered everything from aircraft systems to combat tactics, each explanation delivered as if he were educating someone who had never been exposed to military aviation beyond maintenance. Hangar conversations. Sarah's responses were carefully measured to maintain her cover while gathering information about Thompson's flying techniques and decision-making processes. She asked appropriate questions that reinforced her technician identity while observing details that revealed both his strengths and limitations as a pilot. Thompson was competent, but not exceptional, skilled enough to handle routine missions, but lacking the intuitive understanding that characterized truly great aviators. The emergency landing site appeared ahead of them as a small strip of concrete, surrounded by desert scrubland, with Lieutenant Collins's disabled F-35 sitting alone near a basic operations building. Thompson's approach was textbook perfect, demonstrating solid fundamental skills while maintaining complete control throughout the landing sequence. His touchdown was smooth and professional, exactly what would be expected from an experienced military pilot handling routine transportation duties. The situation on the ground was more complex than initial reports had suggested. Collins's F-35 had experienced multiple system failures that went beyond simple mechanical problems, indicating potential electronic warfare system malfunctions that would require sophisticated diagnostic procedures. Sarah's expertise was indeed essential for determining whether the aircraft could be repaired locally or would require transport back to Riverside for extensive maintenance work. Thompson's behavior changed subtly once they were on the ground, his confident demeanor shifting towards something more calculating and predatory. The remote location provided privacy that had been absent during their previous interactions, creating opportunities for conversations and actions that would leave no witnesses beyond the stranded pilot, who was focused entirely on his own aircraft. Problems. Sarah sensed the change immediately, her instincts warning of developing danger. The diagnostic work required Sarah to access systems throughout the disabled F-35, her movements efficient and purposeful as she traced electronic pathways and tested component functionality. Thompson watched with growing amazement as she navigated complex systems with expertise that far exceeded anything he had expected from a maintenance technician. Her knowledge was too detailed, too intuitive, too comprehensive for someone whose training should have been limited to routine repair procedures. Thompson's questions became more pointed as he observed Sarah's work, his pilot's training helping him recognize skills that shouldn't exist in someone with her supposed background. The way she understood system integration, interpreted diagnostic data, and spoke about electronic warfare capabilities suggested experience that went far beyond technical school education. His suspicions were growing, but he couldn't yet identify what exactly was wrong with the picture she presented. The repair work revealed the full scope of the F-35's problems, sophisticated electronic warfare system failures that would normally require factory-level diagnostics and specialized equipment unavailable at the remote strip. However, Sarah's analysis suggested alternative approaches that could restore basic functionality and allow the aircraft to return to Riverside under its own power. Her solutions were elegant and innovative, demonstrating tactical thinking rather than routine maintenance procedures. Thompson's growing awareness of Sarah's unusual capabilities coincided with his realization that they were essentially alone in the middle of nowhere, with hours of work remaining before the F-35 could be restored to flight status. The combination of privacy, opportunity, and his increasingly suspicious nature created a dangerous situation that neither man nor woman had anticipated when the emergency response mission began. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. The repair work on Lieutenant Collins's F-35 required 3 hours of intensive diagnostics and component replacement, during which Sarah's expertise became increasingly difficult to conceal. Thompson watched with growing fascination as she navigated systems that should have been beyond her clearance level, speaking casually about classified capabilities and tactical applications that weren't covered in standard maintenance training. His questions grew more probing with each passing hour, and Sarah could feel her carefully constructed identity beginning to unravel under his scrutiny. Collins remained focused on his own concerns, coordinating with Riverside operations and filing incident reports that would determine his career trajectory following the emergency landing. His distraction provided a buffer between Sarah and Thompson's intensifying interrogation, but it also meant that no witnesses were paying attention to the subtle psychological warfare developing around the disabled aircraft. Thompson's suspicions had evolved into active investigation, and he was methodically testing Sarah's knowledge against the limitations of her supposed background. The breakthrough came when Sarah correctly identified a classified electronic countermeasure sequence that wasn't documented in any technical manual available to maintenance personnel. Thompson recognized the information immediately because he had been briefed on the same capability during classified pilot training, and he knew with absolute certainty that no technician should possess such knowledge. His reaction was swift and decisive. He demanded an immediate explanation for expertise that clearly exceeded her official qualifications and security clearance. Sarah's cover story crumbled under direct confrontation from someone with sufficient knowledge to recognize the impossibility of her claims. Thompson's pilot training included extensive briefings on electronic warfare systems, and he could distinguish between textbook knowledge and operational experience with uncomfortable accuracy. Her attempts to deflect his questions only reinforced his conviction that she was hiding something significant about her background and qualifications. The interrogation intensified as Thompson realized he had stumbled onto something far more interesting than routine maintenance work. His questions became rapid-fire challenges, designed to expose contradictions in her story while testing the depth of her knowledge across multiple technical areas. Sarah found herself caught between maintaining her cover and providing accurate information needed to complete the F-35 repairs, a balance that became increasingly impossible as Thompson's expertise allowed him to identify discrepancies in real time. Collins finished his coordination calls and approached the two maintenance workers who seemed to be engaged in an unusually intense technical discussion. Thompson interpreted her careful observation as nervous fascination with unfamiliar technology, missing entirely the systematic evaluation being conducted by someone with extensive high-performance aircraft experience. The takeoff proceeded normally, despite Thompson's unnecessary commentary about G-forces and aircraft performance, characteristics that Sarah supposedly wouldn't understand. His explanation of basic aerodynamic principles was delivered with patronizing patience, designed to reinforce the gap between pilot expertise and technician ignorance. Sarah listened with apparent attention while her mind focused on more important considerations: flight path analysis, weather conditions, and emergency procedures that might become relevant during an increasingly unpredictable mission. The flight toward the emergency landing site provided Thompson with a captive audience for demonstrations of his piloting skills and tactical knowledge. He flew with aggressive precision designed to impress his passenger while maintaining control over the aircraft and situation. His running commentary covered everything from aircraft systems to combat tactics, each explanation delivered as if he were educating someone who had never been exposed to military aviation beyond maintenance. Hangar conversations. Sarah's responses were carefully measured to maintain her cover while gathering information about Thompson's flying techniques and decision-making processes. She asked appropriate questions that reinforced her technician identity while observing details that revealed both his strengths and limitations as a pilot. Thompson was competent, but not exceptional, skilled enough to handle routine missions, but lacking the intuitive understanding that characterized truly great aviators. The emergency landing site appeared ahead of them as a small strip of concrete, surrounded by desert scrubland, with Lieutenant Collins's disabled F-35 sitting alone near a basic operations building. Thompson's approach was textbook perfect, demonstrating solid fundamental skills while maintaining complete control throughout the landing sequence. His touchdown was smooth and professional, exactly what would be expected from an experienced military pilot handling routine transportation duties. The situation on the ground was more complex than initial reports had suggested. Collins's F-35 had experienced multiple system failures that went beyond simple mechanical problems, indicating potential electronic warfare system malfunctions that would require sophisticated diagnostic procedures. Sarah's expertise was indeed essential for determining whether the aircraft could be repaired locally or would require transport back to Riverside for extensive maintenance work. Thompson's behavior changed subtly once they were on the ground, his confident demeanor shifting towards something more calculating and predatory. The remote location provided privacy that had been absent during their previous interactions, creating opportunities for conversations and actions that would leave no witnesses beyond the stranded pilot, who was focused entirely on his own aircraft. Problems. Sarah sensed the change immediately, her instincts warning of developing danger. The diagnostic work required Sarah to access systems throughout the disabled F-35, her movements efficient and purposeful as she traced electronic pathways and tested component functionality. Thompson watched with growing amazement as she navigated complex systems with expertise that far exceeded anything he had expected from a maintenance technician. Her knowledge was too detailed, too intuitive, too comprehensive for someone whose training should have been limited to routine repair procedures. Thompson's questions became more pointed as he observed Sarah's work, his pilot's training helping him recognize skills that shouldn't exist in someone with her supposed background. The way she understood system integration, interpreted diagnostic data, and spoke about electronic warfare capabilities suggested experience that went far beyond technical school education. His suspicions were growing, but he couldn't yet identify what exactly was wrong with the picture she presented. The repair work revealed the full scope of the F-35's problems, sophisticated electronic warfare system failures that would normally require factory-level diagnostics and specialized equipment unavailable at the remote strip. However, Sarah's analysis suggested alternative approaches that could restore basic functionality and allow the aircraft to return to Riverside under its own power. Her solutions were elegant and innovative, demonstrating tactical thinking rather than routine maintenance procedures. Thompson's growing awareness of Sarah's unusual capabilities coincided with his realization that they were essentially alone in the middle of nowhere, with hours of work remaining before the F-35 could be restored to flight status. The combination of privacy, opportunity, and his increasingly suspicious nature created a dangerous situation that neither man nor woman had anticipated when the emergency response mission began. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. The repair work on Lieutenant Collins's F-35 required 3 hours of intensive diagnostics and component replacement, during which Sarah's expertise became increasingly difficult to conceal. Thompson watched with growing fascination as she navigated systems that should have been beyond her clearance level, speaking casually about classified capabilities and tactical applications that weren't covered in standard maintenance training. His questions grew more probing with each passing hour, and Sarah could feel her carefully constructed identity beginning to unravel under his scrutiny. Collins remained focused on his own concerns, coordinating with Riverside operations and filing incident reports that would determine his career trajectory following the emergency landing. His distraction provided a buffer between Sarah and Thompson's intensifying interrogation, but it also meant that no witnesses were paying attention to the subtle psychological warfare developing around the disabled aircraft. Thompson's suspicions had evolved into active investigation, and he was methodically testing Sarah's knowledge against the limitations of her supposed background. The breakthrough came when Sarah correctly identified a classified electronic countermeasure sequence that wasn't documented in any technical manual available to maintenance personnel. Thompson recognized the information immediately because he had been briefed on the same capability during classified pilot training, and he knew with absolute certainty that no technician should possess such knowledge. His reaction was swift and decisive. He demanded an immediate explanation for expertise that clearly exceeded her official qualifications and security clearance. Sarah's cover story crumbled under direct confrontation from someone with sufficient knowledge to recognize the impossibility of her claims. Thompson's pilot training included extensive briefings on electronic warfare systems, and he could distinguish between textbook knowledge and operational experience with uncomfortable accuracy. Her attempts to deflect his questions only reinforced his conviction that she was hiding something significant about her background and qualifications. The interrogation intensified as Thompson realized he had stumbled onto something far more interesting than routine maintenance work. His questions became rapid-fire challenges, designed to expose contradictions in her story while testing the depth of her knowledge across multiple technical areas. Sarah found herself caught between maintaining her cover and providing accurate information needed to complete the F-35 repairs, a balance that became increasingly impossible as Thompson's expertise allowed him to identify discrepancies in real time. Collins finished his coordination calls and approached the two maintenance workers who seemed to be engaged in an unusually intense technical discussion. His arrival provided momentary relief from Thompson's interrogation, but it also created new complications as three military professionals with different agendas found themselves trapped together in an increasingly tense situation. Thompson's discovery had created leverage he clearly intended to use, while Sarah faced exposure that could destroy everything she had built during 5 years of careful anonymity. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Collins had experienced during his military career. Thompson's questions about Sarah's background were aggressive and personal, delivered with the intensity of someone conducting a criminal investigation rather than casual workplace conversation. Sarah's responses were increasingly evasive, her obvious discomfort creating an atmosphere of suspicion that made Collins wonder what he had stumbled into during what should have been routine emergency maintenance. Thompson's accusations escalated from implied suspicion to direct challenge as he confronted Sarah with specific examples of knowledge that contradicted her official background. He cited classified briefings, tactical procedures, and technical capabilities that weren't available to personnel with her supposed clearance level and training history. Each example was carefully chosen to demonstrate that her expertise extended far beyond anything possible for a maintenance technician, regardless of experience or professional development. Sarah's final attempt to maintain her cover involved claiming exposure to classified information through routine maintenance work and informal pilot conversations. Thompson dismantled this explanation with surgical precision, pointing out that the specific knowledge she had demonstrated wasn't discussed in pilot briefings accessible to support personnel. His interrogation revealed both his own limitations and his genuine expertise in areas where their knowledge overlapped. The confrontation reached its climax when Thompson made a direct accusation that Sarah was operating under false identity and demanded immediate disclosure of her real background and qualifications. His tone carried the authority of an officer questioning subordinate personnel, but his underlying motivation seemed more personal than professional. Collins found himself witnessing what appeared to be either legitimate security investigation or elaborate personal vendetta disguised as official inquiry. Sarah's response surprised both men with its calm dignity and complete honesty. Rather than continuing her desperate attempts to maintain a cover story that had already been exposed, she made the conscious decision to reveal her true identity and accept whatever consequences followed. Her explanation began with simple facts: her real name, her former rank, and her previous assignment as a naval aviator, but quickly expanded to include the complex circumstances that had forced her into exile and anonymity. The revelation that Sarah Mitchell was actually Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, former Top Gun instructor and holder of 3 Navy Cross Medals, struck Thompson like a physical blow. His expression cycled through disbelief, confusion, and dawning recognition as he processed information that completely inverted his understanding of the woman he had been interrogating. Collins stepped backward involuntarily, his mind struggling to reconcile the quiet technician he knew with the legendary pilot, whose accomplishments were discussed in aviation circles throughout the military. Sarah's account of the South China Sea incident and its aftermath was delivered with the precise detail of someone who had relived those events countless times during 5 years of exile. She described the joint Navy-Air Force operation that had been compromised by intelligence leaks, resulting in the deaths of 6 aircrew members and the destruction of classified technology that had taken years to develop. Her squadron had walked into a carefully prepared trap, and she had been designated as the scapegoat for failures that originated at the highest levels of command. Thompson's interrogation techniques, which had seemed so effective against a maintenance technician, proved completely inadequate when applied to someone with Sarah's background and training. She answered his questions with the precision of an officer providing testimony, each response carefully structured to convey maximum information while maintaining operational security about details that remained classified. Her transformation from defensive technician to confident military professional was remarkable to witness. Collins found himself caught between fascination and horror as Sarah described the political machinations that had destroyed her career and forced her into hiding. The story involved senior officers whose corruption had cost American lives, intelligence agencies more concerned with protecting institutional reputation than pursuing justice, and a military justice system that had been manipulated to protect the guilty while punishing the innocent. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, involving dozens of officials across multiple branches of government. The evidence against Sarah had been manufactured with sophisticated precision by people who understood exactly how military investigations operated and what kinds of proof would satisfy review panels. Falsified communications logs, altered mission recordings, and perjured testimony from officers who had been promised career advancement in exchange for cooperation. The case against her had been built methodically over months, creating an appearance of overwhelming evidence that made her guilt seem undeniable. Thompson's reaction to Sarah's revelations revealed the fundamental differences between their characters and motivations. Where he had expected to find evidence of security violations or personal dishonesty, he instead discovered a tragedy of institutional betrayal and individual sacrifice that challenged everything he believed about military justice and professional advancement. His comfortable assumptions about merit-based promotion and reward systems crumbled as Sarah described how political connections and corruption had triumphed over competence and integrity. The courtroom proceedings that had ended Sarah's naval career were described with clinical precision that barely concealed the emotional devastation they had caused. Military prosecutors had presented fabricated evidence with absolute confidence, knowing that their case was built on lies but protected by institutional authority that made questioning their conclusions tantamount to challenging the entire system. Sarah's defense had been undermined by classified restrictions that prevented disclosure of evidence that might have exonerated her. Collins interrupted Sarah's narrative with questions that revealed his growing understanding of the injustice she had suffered. His inquiries focused on procedural aspects of the case that seemed designed to identify points where the system had failed rather than challenge the accuracy of her account. Thompson remained silent during these exchanges, his expression suggesting internal struggle between preconceived notions and mounting evidence that contradicted his worldview. The personal cost of Sarah's ordeal extended far beyond the loss of rank and career prospects. She described the destruction of relationships with family members who couldn't understand her disgrace, the financial devastation that followed her discharge, and the psychological trauma of being branded a traitor by the institution she had served with distinction. Her transformation from decorated hero to invisible exile had required abandoning everything that defined her identity and starting over with nothing but determination to survive. Thompson's questions about Sarah's years in hiding revealed his struggle to comprehend how someone with her background and qualifications could have remained undetected for so long. Her explanation involved carefully constructed documentation, strategic career choices that avoided situations requiring detailed background investigation, and the deliberate adoption of personality traits that discouraged close scrutiny. She had become invisible by making herself unremarkable, hiding extraordinary competence beneath a facade of adequate mediocrity. The discussion turned to broader questions about military culture and institutional integrity that neither Thompson nor Collins were prepared to address. Sarah's experience had provided her with insights into systemic problems that extended far beyond individual cases of corruption or incompetence. She spoke about promotion systems that rewarded political skills over professional competence, investigation procedures that prioritized institutional protection over truth-seeking, and cultural norms that discouraged questioning authority even when authority was demonstrably wrong. Collins found himself questioning assumptions about military justice and fairness that he had never examined closely during his own career. Sarah's case revealed how easily institutional power could be used to destroy individuals who lack sufficient political connections or resources to defend themselves effectively. The implications for his own career and the careers of countless other officers were deeply troubling, suggesting that competence and integrity provided less protection than he had believed. Thompson's psychological transformation during this conversation was remarkable to observe. His initial confidence and aggressive questioning gave way to increasingly defensive postures as Sarah's story challenged fundamental beliefs about how the military operated and who it protected. He had built his identity around assumptions about merit-based advancement and institutional fairness that were being systematically dismantled by someone whose experience contradicted everything he thought he knew. The technical discussion that had triggered Thompson's suspicions seemed trivial compared to the larger issues Sarah's revelations had raised. Her knowledge of classified systems was explained by years of operational experience at the highest levels of naval aviation, including assignments that had required intimate familiarity with capabilities that remained highly classified. Thompson's attempt to catch her in security violations had instead uncovered evidence of expertise that far exceeded his own in areas where their knowledge overlapped. Sarah's decision to reveal her true identity had been motivated by exhaustion with maintaining a false persona as much as recognition that her cover had been irretrievably compromised. 5 years of living as someone else had extracted a psychological toll that she was no longer willing to pay, especially when discovery seemed inevitable. Thompson's interrogation had provided the catalyst for a decision she had been considering for months without finding sufficient courage to act. The immediate practical implications of Sarah's disclosure were staggering for all 3 officers present. Thompson possessed information that could result in serious criminal charges against someone whose only crime had been surviving institutional betrayal with dignity intact. Collins had witnessed revelations that could compromise his own career if he was perceived as complicit in covering up security violations. Sarah faced exposure that would almost certainly result in arrest and prosecution, regardless of the injustices she had suffered. Thompson's internal struggle between duty and conscience played out visibly as he processed the implications of his phase. Discovery. Military regulations required him to report security violations immediately, but those same regulations had been used to destroy an innocent officer, whose only mistake had been trusting colleagues who later betrayed her. His next actions would determine whether justice or institutional protection prevailed, a choice that would define his character more clearly than any previous decision in his career. Collins attempted to mediate between competing loyalties and obligations by suggesting that Sarah's case deserved review through proper channels rather than immediate prosecution. His proposal involved approaching senior officers with unquestionable integrity who might be willing to investigate historical injustices and potentially provide remedies for past wrongs. Thompson's response was noncommittal, his internal conflict preventing decisive action in either direction. The conversation was interrupted by radio calls from Riverside operations, requesting status updates on the F-35 repairs and estimated return times for the emergency response team. Collins coordinated the response while Sarah completed final system checks that would allow the aircraft to return to base safely. Thompson remained silent during these activities, his mind clearly focused on decisions that would affect multiple careers and potentially expose corruption that extended to the highest levels of military leadership. The F-35 systems came online with precision that demonstrated Sarah's extraordinary competence despite the emotional stress of her unwilling disclosure. Every component functioned perfectly, every diagnostic parameter fell within acceptable ranges, and every safety system operated according to specifications. Her repair work was flawless, executed under primitive conditions with improvised tools and techniques that showcased abilities far beyond standard maintenance training. Thompson's observation of Sarah's work provided additional evidence of expertise that supported her claims about previous experience and qualifications. Her approach to complex problem-solving, her intuitive understanding of system interactions, and her ability to innovate solutions under pressure all confirmed that she possessed the kind of practical knowledge that could only come from extensive operational experience. The quality of her work was beyond dispute, even if her authority to perform it remained questionable. Collins completed his coordination with base operations and prepared for departure, but the atmosphere among the three officers had been permanently altered by revelations that none of them had anticipated. Thompson faced choices that would determine his own integrity as much as Sarah's future, while Collins struggled with knowledge that carried both legal and ethical obligations. Sarah had gained freedom from years of deception, but at the cost of security that had protected her from prosecution for technical violations that resulted from institutional betrayal. The flight back to Riverside would provide Thompson with additional opportunities to observe Sarah's reactions to high-performance aircraft operations, potentially gathering more evidence about her background while deciding how to handle information that could destroy her life. Collins would serve as witness to whatever developments occurred during the return trip, his testimony potentially crucial for any future investigations or legal proceedings. Sarah faced an uncertain future, but had finally escaped the psychological burden of living as someone else. The three officers prepared for departure with the weight of unresolved decisions hanging over their professional and personal relationships. Thompson's next actions would reveal whether he possessed the character to seek justice rather than simply enforce regulations, while Collins would discover if his principles extended beyond personal convenience to include protection of the innocent. Sarah had chosen honesty over safety, but the consequences of that choice remained to be determined by people whose integrity was about to be tested in ways they had never anticipated. The flight back to Riverside Air Force Base unfolded in tense silence, broken only by routine navigation calls and system status updates. Thompson flew with mechanical precision, while his mind wrestled with decisions that would reshape multiple lives and potentially expose corruption reaching the highest levels of military command. Sarah sat in the rear seat, her secret finally revealed, but her future hanging in the balance of one man's conscience and character. Collins followed in the repaired F-35, equally burdened by knowledge that carried enormous implications for everyone involved. The Nevada landscape passed beneath them in endless expanses of desert and mountain ranges, terrain that had witnessed countless training missions and career-defining moments for generations of military aviators. For Sarah, the view triggered memories of similar flights during her naval career, when she had commanded respect and authority rather than facing potential arrest for technical violations that resulted from institutional betrayal. The contrast between past and present was especially sharp during these moments of enforced reflection. Thompson's internal struggle played out through subtle changes in his flying technique and radio communications. His normal confidence had been replaced by careful deliberation, each decision weighted against moral and legal considerations that he had never been forced to confront. The discovery of Sarah's true identity had shattered comfortable assumptions about military justice and institutional integrity, forcing him to choose between blind obedience to regulations and deeper principles of fairness and truth. The approach to Riverside revealed unusual activity on the flight line, with multiple vehicles and personnel clustered around the operations, building in configurations that suggested official investigation rather than routine base activities. Thompson's radio calls to the tower revealed that General Hayes, the regional commander responsible for Operation Thunderstrike, had arrived unexpectedly and was conducting immediate interviews with exercise participants. The timing of his visit seemed suspiciously related to the emergency response mission and its extended duration. Sarah recognized the implications immediately. Someone had reported irregularities or suspicious behavior that had triggered high-level attention and potential security investigation. The combination of her extended absence from base, Thompson's growing suspicions, and the classified nature of her repair work had created exactly the kind of situation that attracted unwanted scrutiny. Her carefully maintained anonymity was about to be subjected to the kind of official examination that no false identity could survive. Thompson's landing was flawless despite the psychological pressure he was experiencing. His pilot training, providing automatic responses that functioned independently of his emotional state. However, his taxi instructions directed him toward a section of the flight line cordoned off by security personnel rather than normal aircraft parking areas. The official reception waiting for them included military police, intelligence officers, and senior commanders whose presence indicated that routine debriefing had been replaced by formal investigation. General Hayes approached the aircraft as soon as the engines shut down, his expression revealing nothing about his intentions or the information he had already received. Sarah recognized him immediately from photographs and briefings during her naval career, a decorated combat veteran whose reputation for integrity and fair dealing had survived decades of Pentagon politics. His presence suggested that whatever investigation was underway would be conducted with professional thoroughness rather than predetermined conclusions. Thompson climbed out of the cockpit with visible reluctance, his normal post-flight confidence completely absent as he faced senior officers whose questions would determine the trajectory of his career. Sarah followed more slowly, her movements careful and deliberate as she prepared to face consequences that had been inevitable since Thompson's interrogation began. The moment of truth had arrived with military precision, leaving no room for evasion or delay. General Hayes addressed Thompson directly, his questions focused on the emergency response mission and any irregularities or unusual circumstances that had occurred during the repair work. Thompson's answers were technically accurate but incomplete, his reluctance to provide details creating tension that was obvious to everyone present. Sarah remained silent during this exchange, knowing that her input would only complicate an already difficult situation. The questioning shifted focus when Hayes addressed Sarah with unexpected courtesy and respect, asking about her background and qualifications for conducting advanced electronic warfare system repairs under field conditions. His tone suggested prior knowledge that went beyond standard personnel files, raising the possibility that her true identity had already been discovered through channels she hadn't anticipated. The careful phrasing of his questions indicated investigation rather than interrogation. Sarah's response surprised everyone present, including herself. Rather than attempting to maintain her cover story or deflect official inquiry, she requested private consultation with General Hayes to discuss matters that required security clearances and classification levels unavailable to most of the assembled personnel. Her directness and professional bearing transformed the atmosphere from criminal investigation to official consultation between military professionals. Hayes granted her request immediately, ordering the area cleared except for essential personnel, while conducting what appeared to be classified briefing rather than disciplinary action. Thompson found himself excluded from conversations he had initiated, his role reduced to witness rather than investigator, as senior officers took control of developments he had set in motion. The power dynamics had shifted completely, leaving him uncertain about his own position and future. The private conversation between Sarah and General Hayes lasted over an hour, conducted in the base commander's office with security protocols that prevented any external monitoring or documentation. When they emerged, Hayes's demeanor had undergone a subtle but significant transformation from official investigator to protective advocate. Sarah appeared relieved but resolute, her bearing suggesting that important decisions had been made during their confidential discussion. Hayes's announcement to the assembled personnel was carefully worded but unambiguous in its implications. He confirmed that technician Sarah Mitchell was actually Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, former naval aviator whose distinguished service record had been compromised by intelligence failures and prosecutorial misconduct that were currently under investigation by multiple federal agencies. Her presence at Riverside under assumed identity was part of ongoing security operations that remained classified at the highest levels. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled personnel, transforming their understanding of recent events and Sarah's role in them. Thompson's interrogation was reframed as inadvertent interference with classified operations rather than legitimate security investigation, while Collins found himself redesignated as witness to official activities rather than participant in irregular conduct. The entire situation had been inverted by Hayes's disclosure and official protection. Sarah's response to this unexpected vindication was characteristically unconventional and surprising. Rather than accepting reinstatement to her former rank and assignment to prestigious positions that Hayes offered as compensation for years of injustice, she declined all official recognition and requested permission to continue her current assignment under her chosen identity. Her reasoning was personal rather than professional. She had found peace and purpose in her current role that official rehabilitation couldn't improve. Hayes's attempts to persuade Sarah to accept full restoration were persistent but respectful, emphasizing the precedent her case could establish for other victims of institutional injustice and the symbolic importance of acknowledging past wrongs through corrective action. Sarah listened carefully to his arguments but remained firm in her decision to chart her own course rather than return to systems that had failed her so catastrophically. The compromise they eventually reached satisfied both institutional needs and personal preferences, while establishing new precedents for addressing historical injustices. Sarah would accept an official pardon that cleared her record while maintaining her chosen identity and assignment, creating a unique arrangement that acknowledged past wrongs without forcing unwanted restoration. Hayes would establish new oversight mechanisms designed to prevent similar injustices while protecting personnel who reported misconduct. Thompson's role in these developments was addressed with characteristic military directness that left no ambiguity about expectations and consequences. Hayes commended his technical competence while criticizing his judgmental attitudes and discriminatory behavior toward enlisted personnel. The general's evaluation was delivered as professional guidance rather than disciplinary action, but its implications for Thompson's future advancement were unmistakable. The impact on Thompson's worldview was immediately apparent through changes in his demeanor and approach to military relationships. His comfortable assumptions about institutional fairness and merit-based advancement had been shattered by exposure to systemic corruption and injustice that contradicted everything he had believed about military culture. The transformation was painful but necessary, forcing him to confront prejudices and privileges he had never examined critically. Collins emerged from the investigation with enhanced respect for Sarah's competence and character, but also with disturbing awareness of institutional vulnerabilities that threatened every military professional's career security. His experience as witness to injustice and redemption would influence his own leadership development and commitment to protecting subordinate personnel from discriminatory treatment and professional retaliation. The broader implications of Sarah's case extended far beyond individual careers to encompass fundamental questions about military justice, institutional accountability, and the protection of personnel who challenged corrupt practices. Hayes's investigation had revealed systemic problems that required comprehensive reform rather than simple policy adjustments, changes that would take years to implement and decades to evaluate fully. Sarah's decision to remain at Riverside as an electronics technician rather than return to naval aviation was initially incomprehensible to most observers, but it reflected personal growth and value clarification that transcended traditional measures of professional success. She had discovered that meaningful work and authentic relationships mattered more than rank and recognition, lessons that 5 years of exile had taught more effectively than any formal leadership training. The establishment of the Chun Protocol, named in Sarah's honor despite her objections, created new protections for military personnel who reported misconduct or faced retaliation for challenging institutional practices. The protocol included independent investigation procedures, whistleblower protections, and oversight mechanisms designed to prevent the kind of conspiracy that had destroyed Sarah's naval career. Master Sergeant Rodriguez's reaction to these revelations was characteristic of his professional pragmatism and personal loyalty. He had recognized Sarah's exceptional competence without knowing her background, and official confirmation of her qualifications only reinforced his respect for her character and work ethic. His commitment to protecting talented enlisted personnel was strengthened by witnessing how institutional power could be used both destructively and constructively. Lieutenant Wilson's response reflected her own experiences with discrimination and institutional bias, viewing Sarah's vindication as validation of broader principles about merit-based evaluation and equal treatment, regardless of gender or background. Her growing friendship with Sarah was based on mutual respect for competence and integrity rather than shared experiences of injustice, creating a foundation for long-term professional and personal relationships. The completion of Operation Thunder Strike proceeded without further incident, but the exercise's significance had been transformed by revelations about one of its participants. Sarah's presence as both maintenance technician and former combat pilot provided unique perspectives on training effectiveness and safety protocols that influenced future exercise design and implementation. Her insights were sought privately by senior officers who recognized her valuable combination of technical expertise and operational experience. Thompson's performance during the remaining exercise phases was technically competent, but noticeably subdued, reflecting his internal struggle to reconcile past behaviors with newfound understanding of institutional complexity and personal responsibility. His interactions with enlisted personnel became more respectful and professional, suggesting genuine character development rather than simple compliance with official expectations. The media attention that inevitably followed General Hayes's announcement of the Chun Protocol was carefully managed to protect Sarah's privacy while highlighting institutional reforms designed to prevent similar injustices. Her story became a case study in military academies and leadership programs, teaching future officers about the importance of integrity and the dangers of unchecked authority. Sarah's legacy extended beyond policy changes to encompass cultural transformation that would influence military attitudes and practices for generations. Her choice to find dignity in service rather than demand recognition for past achievements demonstrated principles that resonated throughout the military community, inspiring others to value contribution over advancement and character over status. 6 months after Operation Thunderstrike, Sarah continued her work at Riverside Air Force Base with enhanced official recognition of her qualifications, but unchanged commitment to excellence in routine maintenance tasks. Her colleagues had adjusted to knowledge of her background without allowing it to alter fundamental relationships based on mutual respect and shared professional commitment. Thompson's career trajectory was permanently altered by his encounter with Sarah and the lessons it taught about leadership, integrity, and institutional responsibility. His subsequent assignments emphasized development opportunities that would broaden his perspective and challenge assumptions that had limited his effectiveness as an officer and leader. The changes were gradual but genuine, reflecting authentic personal growth rather than calculated career management. The friendship between Sarah and Wilson deepened into mentorship that benefited both participants, with Sarah providing insights about resilience and perspective, while Wilson offered contemporary tactical knowledge and strategic thinking. Their collaboration on training development and safety initiatives demonstrated how diversity of experience and background enhanced Organizational effectiveness when institutional barriers were removed. General Hayes's investigation led to broader reforms that extended throughout the military justice system, creating new protections and oversight mechanisms that would prevent future cases like Sarah's from reaching the same catastrophic conclusions. The changes were incremental but significant, representing institutional acknowledgement that past practices had failed to protect innocent personnel from corrupt practices and political manipulation. The quiet revolution Sarah had sparked through her choice to serve with dignity rather than seek revenge demonstrated that individual character could influence institutional culture more effectively than formal policy changes. Her example inspired countless military personnel to prioritize integrity over advancement and service over self-interest, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond anything she had intended or anticipated. Years later, the Chun Protocol would be recognized as a watershed moment in military justice reform, but Sarah herself remained focused on daily work that contributed to mission success and colleague welfare. She had found peace through service that transcended rank and recognition, discovering that true success meant using her abilities to make positive differences, regardless of official acknowledgement or reward. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.